I'm Ina, 35, and until recently, I was the operations director at TechVision Enterprises. For 10 years, I built security systems that protected millions in government contracts. Then the founder's son publicly fired me, demanding all company property. I simply handed him the campus keys, not realizing they symbolized everything he couldn't access without me. His arrogance became his undoing. Before I share what happened, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to see how justice unfolds when professionals are underestimated. My journey at TechVision Enterprises began a decade ago when Marcus Thompson, the founder, personally recruited me after seeing my presentation at a cybersecurity conference in Boston. At that time, I had just completed my master's in cybersecurity with a specialization in enterprise solutions. Marcus approached me with an ambitious vision, building a company that would revolutionize how businesses handled their security infrastructure. Ina, I need someone who understands both the digital and physical aspects of security, Marcus told me during our first meeting. Someone who can see the whole picture, not just fragments of it. That conversation changed my life. I joined TechVision when it was still operating out of a converted warehouse with just 27 employees. Today, or at least before the incident, we had grown to over 300 employees across 4 locations, with our headquarters in a sleek office building in downtown Seattle. My role evolved as the company grew. Initially hired as a security consultant, I eventually became the operations director, overseeing all aspects of our security infrastructure. This meant I was responsible for designing, implementing, and maintaining both our physical access systems and our digital security protocols. Every door, every server, every encrypted connection in the company had my fingerprints on it, metaphorically speaking. The systems I built weren't just about keeping intruders out. They were sophisticated enough to track access, maintain compliance with government regulations, and protect the intellectual property that made TechVision a leader in its field. These weren't simple keycard systems you could buy off the shelf. They were custom-designed proprietary technologies that gave us a competitive edge when bidding for high-security contracts. Marcus understood the value of what I created. He always said Ina doesn't just build walls, she builds smart walls that think for themselves. We had a professional relationship based on mutual respect. He valued my expertise, and I admired his business acumen. When decisions needed to be made about security measures, Marcus made sure I had final say. The company culture reflected Marcus's leadership style: collaborative, innovative, and focused on excellence. We weren't just colleagues. We were a community working toward a shared vision. Amanda Parker, our HR director, often joked that we spent more time implementing team-building strategies than actually needing to use them, because the company naturally attracted people who worked well together. Jacob Miller, our legal counsel, was another key figure in our leadership team. A former prosecutor with a sharp mind and attention to detail, Jacob ensured everything we did was above board, especially when it came to government contracts. Diana Foster, my assistant, had been with me for 6 years and knew the security systems almost as well as I did. These people weren't just co-workers. They had become friends through years of collaboration. During my decade at TechVision, I had personally overseen the successful implementation of security systems for 24 government facilities, 15 financial institutions, and numerous corporate clients. Our reputation for creating unhackable systems had grown to the point where clients came to us, not the other way around. The wall of my office displayed certificates, thank you letters, and photos from clients whose sensitive operations remained secure because of our work. Marcus's son Bradley, however, had always been a distant figure in the company narrative. While Marcus built TechVision from the ground up, Bradley had chosen a different path. He spent 4 years at an Ivy League business school, followed by brief stints at various venture capital firms. His visits to TechVision were infrequent and brief, usually coinciding with holiday parties or special events. I had met Bradley maybe 5 times in 10 years, and our interactions had been superficial at best. He seemed more interested in the prestige associated with being the founder's son than the actual work we did. Marcus occasionally mentioned his hope that Bradley would eventually join the family business, but he never pushed the issue publicly. Everything changed when Marcus announced his plan to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic partnerships. The company-wide email came as a surprise to most of us. Bradley would be taking over as Chief Operating Officer, effectively becoming second in command with authority over all department heads, including me. The timing couldn't have been more critical. We were in the final stages of securing our largest government contract, to date a $30 million deal, to overhaul the security systems for a chain of federal research facilities. The contract negotiations had been ongoing for months, with rigorous vetting of our capabilities personnel and compliance procedures. My team and I had worked countless late nights, preparing the proposal, demonstrating prototypes, and answering technical questions from government auditors. The contract was practically secured pending final approval within the next month. All we needed to do was maintain our current course, demonstrate continued compliance with federal security standards, and avoid any major disruptions that might raise concerns about our stability as a contractor. Bradley was scheduled to start the following Monday, the weekend before Marcus called me personally. "Ina, I know this transition might be challenging, but I'm counting on you to help Bradley understand our security infrastructure. It's the backbone of what we do." His voice carried a note of concern that I hadn't heard before. "Of course," I replied, though I wondered why Marcus felt the need to make this request. Shouldn't helping the new COO understand our core business be a given? "Bradley has great ideas from his business school training," Marcus continued, "but he'll need to appreciate the unique aspects of what we've built here, especially with the government contract so close." I assured him I'd do everything possible to ensure a smooth transition, not realizing that Bradley had very different plans for his first day as TechVision's new leader. Monday morning arrived with an unusual buzz around the office. Bradley Thompson was scheduled to arrive at 9, and the executive floor had been prepped accordingly. Fresh flowers adorned the reception area. The conference room had been restocked with premium coffee and pastries, and even the maintenance staff seemed to be moving with extra purpose, making sure everything shined. At 9:15, the elevator doors opened to reveal Bradley. If his intention was to make an impression, he succeeded. His tailored Italian suit probably cost more than my monthly salary. The Rolex on his wrist gleamed under the office lights, and his perfectly styled hair spoke of a morning spent with a personal groomer rather than fighting Seattle traffic. "Good morning, TechVision," he announced loudly as he stepped off the elevator, as though addressing an audience rather than a handful of employees waiting to greet him. "It's a new day for this company." Amanda from HR stepped forward with a professional smile. "Welcome, Bradley. We've prepared the main conference room for your introduction to the team." He barely acknowledged her with a nod before striding toward Marcus's former office, now his. "Have everyone gathered in 15 minutes. I'll need a moment to settle in." Diana, my assistant, caught my eye across the reception area and raised an eyebrow. I gave her a small shrug. First day nerves, perhaps. I wanted to give Bradley the benefit of the doubt. At 9:30 sharp, the leadership team assembled in the conference room. Department heads from development, sales, marketing, finance, legal, and operations. My department took their usual seats around the large table. The anticipation was palpable. Everyone was curious about Marcus's son and his vision for the company. Bradley entered the room with the confidence of someone who had been leading the company for years rather than minutes. He remained standing at the head of the table, a power pose if I had ever seen one. "Thank you all for being here." He began, his voice carrying a practiced cadence that reminded me of business motivational speakers. "As you know, my father has entrusted me with taking TechVision to the next level. While he built an admirable business, it's time to inject some modern thinking into our operations." I noticed several uncomfortable glances exchanged around the table. TechVision was widely considered an industry leader in innovation. To suggest we needed modernization seemed disconnected from reality. Bradley continued, "I've spent the last several years in the venture capital world working with cutting-edge startups that move fast and disrupt industries. That's the mentality we need here." For the next 20 minutes, Bradley outlined his vision, which included aggressive expansion into new markets, streamlining operations, a corporate euphemism for job cuts, and what he called security modernization. When he reached this last point, he looked directly at me. Our current security protocols are frankly excessive and outdated. They're slowing down our ability to innovate and collaborate. We need more agile, lightweight solutions. I straightened in my chair, surprised by this assertion. Our security infrastructure is actually what gives us a competitive advantage, I responded calmly. Especially for government contracts, like the one we're currently finalizing. Bradley's smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, Ina. I've been briefed on the government contract. But those are exactly the kinds of cumbersome relationships that tie us down. There are more profitable avenues with fewer regulations. Jacob, our legal counsel, cleared his throat. The federal contract represents the largest single piece of business in company history. It's been Marcus's goal for years. And now I'm setting new goals, Bradley replied dismissively. We'll honor existing commitments, of course, but our future lies elsewhere. After the meeting concluded, Bradley asked me to stay behind. As the room emptied, I prepared my thoughts ready to explain the sophistication and necessity of our security systems, especially for the government contract that required specific compliance measures. Ina, he began. Once we were alone, my father speaks highly of you. I've enjoyed working with Marcus, I replied. We've built something special here. Yes, well, every company reaches evolution points. I'll be bringing in some of my own people to assess our security needs moving forward. Fresh eyes, you know. The implication was clear. My role was being diminished. Bradley, our security systems aren't just about locking doors. They're integrated throughout our operations, our products, and our compliance frameworks. The government contract specifically requires. He raised a hand, cutting me off. I understand you've been here a long time and change can be difficult, but this is happening. I'd appreciate your cooperation during the transition. What transition exactly? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. I'm bringing in Ryan Parker next week. He's got an MBA from Wharton and has consulted for several tech firms on streamlining security overhead. Does he have experience with government security compliance, FISMA requirements, NIST frameworks? I asked, naming just a few of the complex regulations our systems were designed to satisfy. Bradley waved his hand dismissively. Those details can be learned. What we need is innovative thinking. I left that meeting with a growing sense of unease. In my office, I immediately began documenting every aspect of our security systems, creating detailed guides that would ensure continuity, even if I wasn't there to oversee them. Something told me to prepare for the worst. Over the next few days, Bradley made his presence increasingly felt throughout the company. He scheduled meetings with every department, often emerging with proclamations about inefficiencies and outdated approaches. Staff members began to look anxious when summoned to his office. On Wednesday, I spotted Diana hurrying to my office, her face tense. Ina, Bradley just met with the development team and told them our security protocols for code review are being eliminated effective immediately. Max tried to explain why we have those checks in place, but Bradley shut him down in front of everyone. This wasn't just bad management. It was potentially catastrophic for our government compliance. I pulled up our contract requirements and drafted an email to Bradley explaining the legal necessity of our code review procedures. His response came an hour later, noted, "We'll discuss at tomorrow's all-hands meeting." I hadn't heard about any all-hands meeting. A quick check with Amanda confirmed that Bradley had scheduled a company-wide gathering for 10 a.m. the next day. The purpose was listed simply as Strategic Direction Update. That evening, I stayed late at the office, making sure all my documentation was complete and accessible. I created secure backups of critical security information and sent confidential notes to Jacob about my concerns regarding compliance issues. Something felt off, and my years in security had taught me to trust my instincts. As I was leaving around 8 p.m., I ran into Amanda in the parking garage. Late night, I asked, noting her tired expression. Bradley had me revising the entire company org chart, she said with a sigh. Major changes coming, Ina. I can't say more, but just be prepared for tomorrow." The anxiety that had been building in my stomach intensified. I barely slept that night, running through scenarios in my mind, trying to anticipate what Bradley might be planning and how it would affect the security systems I'd spent a decade building. Morning came too quickly. As I dressed for work, I chose my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit that I reserved for client presentations and important meetings. Whatever happened today, I would face it with dignity. The tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife when I arrived. Small groups of employees whispered in corners, conversations stopping abruptly when others approached. No one seemed to know exactly what was coming, but everyone sensed it wouldn't be good. At 9:55, we began filing into the main conference area, which had been expanded to accommodate all headquarters staff. Bradley stood at the front, reviewing notes on his tablet, occasionally glancing up to survey the gathering crowd. His expression revealed nothing, but his posture emanated confidence. As I took a seat near the front, Diana squeezed in beside me. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we've got your back." I nodded gratefully, though I wasn't entirely sure what she meant. Did everyone know something I didn't? At precisely 10 a.m. Bradley stepped to the center of the room, and the murmur of conversations faded to silence. The company-wide meeting was about to begin, and with it a dramatic shift in my professional life that I could never have anticipated. "Good morning, TechVision." Bradley began, his voice projecting confidence across the packed conference room. "Thank you all for being here for this important announcement about our future direction." The room fell into a deeper silence. I could feel the collective tension as nearly 100 employees waited to hear what changes their new leader had in store. As I've been sharing with many of you this week, TechVision stands at a crucial inflection point. Bradley continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room, like a speaker on a TED Talk stage. "We have an opportunity to transform from a good company into a truly great one, but that requires courage to make difficult decisions." I noticed Jacob, our legal counsel, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted toward me briefly before returning to Bradley. Something definitely wasn't right. "My father built a solid foundation," Bradley said. "But to reach the next level, we need to shed outdated approaches and embrace a more agile, competitive mindset. In my first week here, I've identified several obstacles to our growth potential." The word obstacles hung in the air ominously. I maintained my professional composure, though my instincts were screaming that this was heading in a dangerous direction. Bradley clicked a button on his remote, and a PowerPoint slide appeared on the large screen behind him. The title read, "Strategic Realignment," with 3 bullet points below: streamlined processes, flexible security, and leadership refresh. "Let me be direct," Bradley said, turning to face the room more fully. "Some of our current practices are holding us back from achieving greatness, particularly in the area of security and operations." My heart rate accelerated. Every eye in the room seemed to turn toward me. "Our current security protocols are excessive, inflexible, and frankly outdated," Bradley continued, now looking directly at me. "They create unnecessary friction in our development process, limit our ability to collaborate with partners, and waste resources on compliance measures that go far beyond what's required." I felt my cheeks grow warm but kept my expression neutral. These accusations weren't just incorrect, they demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what made TechVision successful in the first place. Bradley clicked to the next slide, which showed a simplified organizational chart with several positions highlighted in red, including mine. "Effective leadership requires making examples," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Today, I'm demonstrating my commitment to our new direction by making changes that might surprise some of you, but will ultimately benefit us all." The room was so quiet you could hear the HVAC system humming in the background. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. "Ina Wilson Bradley," said, turning to face me directly. "As our current operations director, you've been with TechVision for a long time. Perhaps too long." Murmurs rippled through the audience. I sat perfectly still, my back straight, refusing to show any reaction, though my pulse pounded in my ears. "Your approach to security is outdated and inflexible. Your resistance to my proposed changes shows an unwillingness to evolve with the company. This is exactly the kind of obstacle we need to remove." Bradley's voice rose as he continued, clearly playing to the audience now. "I'm a big boss now, and sometimes being a leader means making difficult decisions for the greater good." I could see Amanda from HR shifting nervously. This was not standard termination protocol by any measure. "Therefore, effective immediately, Ina Wilson is no longer employed by TechVision Enterprises," Bradley announced with a dramatic finality. "This is an example of how seriously I take our new direction. No one is exempt from the changes we need to make." The shock in the room was palpable. Colleagues exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some looked down at their laps, uncomfortable with the public spectacle. Others stared at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to disbelief. Bradley wasn't finished. He walked closer to where I was seated, extending his hand dramatically. "Please, hand over all company property in your possession immediately. Your access has already been revoked." Time seemed to slow down. In that moment, I had a choice to make. I could create a scene, argue my case publicly, point out all the flaws in Bradley's understanding of our security systems, or I could respond with dignity. I chose dignity. Standing slowly, I reached into my purse and removed the master keyring that contained physical access keys to every facility TechVision owned. The irony wasn't lost on me in our digital age. These physical keys were merely symbolic, representing the vast digital security infrastructure I had built, but they were indeed company property. Without a word, I stepped forward and slid the keys across the conference table toward Bradley. They made a slight scraping sound in the silent room. Bradley looked momentarily confused, as if he'd expected more resistance, or perhaps a tearful scene. He recovered, quickly picking up the keys with a satisfied smile. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings," he said dismissively. "That won't be necessary," I replied, my voice steady, despite the emotion churning inside me. "I keep very little at my desk." As I walked toward the exit, head held high, I could feel hundreds of eyes on my back. Just before reaching the door, I turned to face the room one last time. I didn't speak, but I made brief eye contact with Jacob and Amanda, who both looked deeply troubled by what had just transpired. Then I walked out, closing the door quietly behind me. In the empty hallway, I took a deep breath, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. 10 years of dedication ended in public humiliation. But even as I walked to my office to collect my few personal items, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that Bradley had just made a catastrophic mistake. Those keys he had so triumphantly accepted were just physical symbols. The real keys, the digital access, codes, the compliance protocols, the security architecture that I had built layer by layer over a decade, couldn't be handed over in a dramatic gesture. What Bradley didn't realize yet was that government contracts had specific requirements for security transitions. You couldn't simply fire the head of security and expect everything to continue functioning seamlessly, especially not weeks before a major government audit. As I placed my family photos and a few books into a small box, Diana appeared in my doorway, her eyes red. "This is wrong, Ina. Everyone knows it." "It's okay," I said, surprised at how calm I felt now. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. I walked out of TechVision headquarters that day without looking back. But I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the end of my story with the company. Bradley Thompson had just set in motion a chain of events that would inevitably lead back to me, whether he realized it or not. The keys I'd handed over were just the beginning. The drive home from TechVision that day was surreal. Traffic moved as usual along the rain-slicked Seattle streets, pedestrians hurried under umbrellas, and the world continued as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had shifted dramatically. Once safely inside my apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel the full impact of what had happened. The tears came in waves. Anger, humiliation, betrayal. 10 years of dedication ended with public disgrace. I had helped build TechVision from a small startup into an industry leader, and this was how it ended. I barely slept that night. By morning, my emotions had crystallized into something more focused. a determination to maintain my professional integrity, regardless of how unfairly I'd been treated. My phone had been buzzing with messages of support since the previous afternoon. Amanda from HR had texted, "What happened today was completely inappropriate." For what it's worth, I protested the method strongly. Jacob had been more direct. This termination process violated company policy on multiple levels. Call me when you're ready to talk. Diana, my assistant left a voicemail that nearly brought fresh tears. The office feels wrong without you. Bradley has no idea what he's done. I responded to each message with brief thanks but avoided discussing details. Years in security had taught me the value of discretion, especially in sensitive situations. By mid-morning, I had created a detailed document outlining every security system, protocol, and compliance requirement I had overseen. Not because I intended to sabotage anything, I had too much professional pride for that, but because I wanted a clear record of the state of affairs when I left. If questions arose later, I would have documentation. Meanwhile, at TechVision, Bradley was already implementing changes. Through discreet updates from concerned colleagues, I learned that he had immediately brought in Ryan Parker, his friend from business school, as the new director of security operations. Ryan's LinkedIn profile showed plenty of business experience, but virtually nothing related to cybersecurity or government compliance frameworks. One of my former team members texted me. New guy asked how to access the FISMA compliance documentation. When we explained the secure access protocols, he called them unnecessarily complicated and asked for a simple workaround. This was particularly alarming because FISMA Federal Information Security Management Act compliance was a cornerstone of our government contract requirements. These weren't arbitrary rules I had created. They were federal mandates with legal consequences for non-compliance. On day 3, after my termination, Amanda called me directly. Ina, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but things are getting concerning here. Bradley and Ryan have dismantled several security protocols without understanding their purpose. Jacob tried to raise concerns about the government contract requirements, but Bradley dismissed him, saying they would figure it out. Have they scheduled a proper handover of the security systems? I asked, knowing the answer already. No, Amanda replied. Bradley seems to think that taking your keys was sufficient. He doesn't understand that there are documented procedures for security leadership transitions, especially with active government contracts. I sighed. The physical keys were largely symbolic, Amanda. The real access controls are digital, with specific handover protocols required by federal regulations. I know that, and Jacob knows that, but Bradley won't listen. He keeps saying they need to move fast and break things like they do in startups. The irony was painful. TechVision wasn't a startup. It was an established security contractor with obligations and responsibilities. Breaking things in our industry meant potentially compromising sensitive information or failing government audits. By the end of the first week, Jacob contacted me formally. Ina, I need to ask you some questions about the security compliance documentation. Off the record. What's happening, Jacob? I asked. Ryan can't make sense of the security architecture you built. They're making changes without understanding the dependencies, and we have the government security audit in 2 weeks. I'm concerned about our legal exposure here. I took a deep breath. Jacob, I'd be happy to clarify any documentation I left behind, but I can't provide consulting services without a formal arrangement. That would be inappropriate, given the circumstances of my termination. I understand, Jacob said. This situation is unprecedented. Bradley doesn't grasp the complexity of what you built, or the regulatory requirements involved. He seems to think security is just a matter of setting some passwords. The following Monday, 10 days after my firing, Diana called in a panic. The authentication servers are down. Nobody can access the secure development environment, and Ryan doesn't understand the backup protocols. Bradley is furious. I felt a twinge of sympathy for the technical team caught in this mess. Diana, I documented all the recovery procedures. They should be in the security operations manual. That's just it, Diana replied. Ryan says your documentation is too complex and technically dense. He wants to implement a simpler solution, but the developers are saying that would compromise the security architecture required for the government contract. Throughout the second week, similar calls and messages arrived with increasing frequency. Bradley had apparently begun blaming me for deliberately creating an overly complicated system rather than acknowledging that security for government contracts was inherently complex and highly regulated. Ryan had attempted to replace our multi-factor authentication system with a simpler solution that failed to meet federal requirements. The development team was in open revolt against changes that would force them to rebuild critical systems weeks before the government audit. Then came the most predictable yet still shocking development. Marcus Thompson, the company founder and Bradley's father, was flying back from his extended business trip in Asia. Amanda texted me the news: Marcus is returning early. Board meeting called for tomorrow morning. This isn't good. That evening I received an unexpected call from Marcus himself. His voice sounded tired and strained. Ina, I've just been briefed on what happened. I want to apologize personally for how you were treated. Thank you, Marcus, I replied, surprised by the call. I'm still trying to understand the full situation, but it's clear that Bradley handled things inappropriately. Jacob tells me there are serious concerns about our security compliance ahead of the government audit. I chose my words carefully. The security systems at TechVision were designed specifically to meet federal requirements. Any significant changes to those systems would need to be carefully planned and documented. And properly handed over, Marcus added. Jacob mentioned something about formal security transition protocols for government contracts. Yes, I confirmed. Federal regulations require specific procedures when changing security leadership. It's not just about physical access. It's about legal responsibility and accountability. Marcus was silent for a moment. Ina, would you be willing to come to the board meeting tomorrow? Not to place blame or revisit the termination, but to help us understand exactly where we stand with our security compliance. As a paid consultant, of course. The request took me by surprise. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with TechVision after how I'd been treated. But another part, the professional who had spent 10 years building something valuable, couldn't stand by and watch it fall apart. I'll be there, I said finally. Send me the details. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions, vindication that my expertise was still needed, sadness, that the company was in such disarray, and a quiet determination to handle this next chapter with the same professionalism I had always maintained. Whatever happened at tomorrow's board meeting would be a turning point not just for Bradley, but for TechVision as a whole, and for my own professional future. The keys I had handed over so quietly had indeed unlocked consequences that no one, especially not Bradley, had anticipated. The TechVision headquarters looked exactly the same as I approached the building the next morning. Same gleaming glass facade, same tasteful signage, same security guard at the front desk. But everything felt different now that I was arriving as an outsider, an external consultant, rather than the operations director who had helped build the place. The security guard Frank broke into a wide smile when he saw me. Miss Wilson, good to see you back. Just visiting today, Frank, I replied with a small smile. I have a meeting with the board. His expression turned knowing. Ah, I see. They're already gathered in the main boardroom. Mr. Thompson Sr. arrived about 30 minutes ago. As Frank issued me a visitor badge, a strange experience after 10 years with executive access, I noticed a certain tension in the building. Employees passing through the lobby darted curious glances my way. Word of my return had clearly spread. Diana was waiting by the elevators, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. Ina, thank goodness you're here. It's been chaos. As we rode up to the executive floor, she filled me in on the latest developments. The government auditors arrived yesterday for their preliminary assessment, and it was a disaster. Ryan couldn't explain basic elements of our security compliance framework. Bradley kept interrupting with business jargon that didn't address their technical questions. One of the auditors actually asked if they should reschedule when someone knowledgeable about the security systems could be present. The elevator doors opened to reveal a floor in quiet turmoil. Small groups of employees whispered urgently in corners, dispersing when they noticed my arrival. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see the executive team and board members already assembled, with Marcus Thompson at the head of the table looking grave. Jacob stepped out to meet me, extending his hand formally for the benefit of onlookers. "Thank you for coming, Miss Wilson. The board is ready for your assessment." As we entered the boardroom, all conversation ceased. Bradley, seated to his father's right, visibly stiffened when he saw me. Marcus stood to greet me, his handshake firm and his expression apologetic. "Ina, thank you for agreeing to help us understand the situation," Marcus said. "Please have a seat." I took the chair reserved for me directly across from Bradley, whose face had settled into a carefully neutral expression. Marcus addressed the room. "For those who haven't been fully briefed, we're facing significant challenges with our government contract security compliance. The audit team has raised serious concerns about recent changes to our security protocols. I've asked Ina to provide an expert assessment of where we stand and what remediation might be necessary." Jacob slid a folder across the table to me. "These are the preliminary findings from yesterday's audit review. They've identified 17 critical compliance issues that must be addressed before the final audit next week." I opened the folder and scanned the contents, though nothing in the report surprised me. Disabled multi-factor authentication for administrative access, incomplete audit logging, unauthorized changes to access control lists. Each violation directly resulted from Bradley's hasty dismantling of the systems I had built. In simple terms, I began keeping my tone professional and factual. "The security changes implemented in the past 2 weeks have compromised our compliance with FISMA requirements and NIST security frameworks, both of which are contractually mandated for the government project." Bradley leaned forward. "Those systems were unnecessarily complex. We're streamlining them to improve efficiency." I met his gaze steadily. "The complexity exists to meet specific federal security requirements. What you're calling streamlining is actually non-compliance from a regulatory perspective." One of the board members, Barbara Taylor, spoke up. "What's the potential impact if these issues aren't resolved before the final audit?" "At minimum, we would fail the security certification required for the contract," I explained. "At worst, we could be found in breach of contract terms, which would likely result in termination of the $30 million agreement and possible debarment from future government contracts." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Marcus turned to Bradley. "You assured me that the security changes were minor adjustments that wouldn't affect our contract obligations." Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Ryan said we could implement the changes without issue. The auditors are being unreasonable." "The auditors," I interjected calmly, "are following standard federal security protocols that haven't changed in years. These are the same requirements we successfully met in our last 5 government contracts." Marcus rubbed his temples, visibly stressed. "How did we get into this situation so quickly? The systems were fully compliant 2 weeks ago." Jacob cleared his throat. "There's a regulatory issue we haven't addressed yet. Federal contracts of this nature require formal security handover procedures when changing security leadership. This includes documented knowledge transfer, signed acceptance of responsibility, and continuity of compliance accountability." "What does that mean in practical terms?" asked another board member. Jacob looked directly at Bradley. "It means that firing the security director without proper transition protocols was itself a compliance violation. The physical keys were just symbols. The real keys, the access credentials, security protocols, and compliance responsibility, required formal handover procedures that never occurred." All eyes turned to Bradley, who was now visibly uncomfortable. "No one told me about these requirements. This is precisely the kind of bureaucratic red tape I was trying to eliminate." "These aren't arbitrary rules," I explained. "They exist because security transitions in high-compliance environments carry significant risks. The government needs to know exactly who is responsible for protecting their information at all times." Marcus looked increasingly dismayed as the full picture emerged. "Can this be fixed before the final audit?" he asked me directly. Yes, but it would require immediately reinstating the original security protocols and documenting the reasons for the temporary changes. We would need to demonstrate that proper controls have been restored and that qualified personnel are now overseeing the systems. The implication hung in the air. Bradley and Ryan were not those qualified personnel. Marcus turned to Jacob. What are our legal options here? Jacob hesitated, glancing briefly at Bradley before answering. We have 3 paths forward. 1. We attempt to address the compliance issues with our current team, though the auditors have expressed doubts about this approach. 2. We request an audit extension which might raise additional concerns about our capabilities. Or 3. We bring in qualified expertise immediately to restore compliance. Meaning Ina Marcus stated plainly. Yes, Jacob confirmed. As the architect of the original systems, she would be the most efficient solution. Bradley finally exploded, his face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You can't possibly be considering bringing her back after I terminated her. What kind of message does that send to the company? Marcus fixed his son with a stern look. The message that we value expertise and proper procedures. That seems appropriate, given the circumstances. The tension in the room was unbearable. Bradley looked from face to face, seeking allies but finding none. Even Ryan, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner, avoided his gaze. Then came the moment that changed everything. Jacob, always precise in his language, asked the question that laid bare the fundamental error. Bradley, he said quietly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear, I need to understand the sequence of events for our records. You fired her, and then she gave you the keys. The question hung in the air. Bradley's expression froze as the implication became clear to everyone in the room. She handed over company property as requested, he stammered. After you had already terminated her, Jacob pressed. Without any security handover procedures. Without a transition plan for the government contract compliance requirements. Marcus's face had gone from concern to shock, to something approaching horror as he realized what his son had done. You fired our security director publicly without consulting me, without a transition plan, 2 weeks before a critical government audit. Bradley had no response. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only when Marcus stood up abruptly. We'll take a 15-minute recess, he announced. Bradley, I need to speak with you privately. Ina, please don't leave. We'll need your expertise to resolve this situation. As they left for Marcus's office, I sat quietly, neither triumphant nor vindictive. This crisis wasn't about my personal vindication. It was about the company I had helped build for a decade and the professional standards I had always upheld. The keys I had silently handed over 2 weeks ago had indeed unlocked consequences that Bradley never anticipated, but what happened next would determine the future of TechVision and my place within it. The 15-minute recess stretched to nearly an hour. Board members and executives stepped out to make calls or whisper in corners, casting occasional glances toward Marcus's office, where he remained closeted with Bradley. The glass walls that usually symbolized the company's transparency had their privacy screens activated, but even through the frosted glass, animated gestures were visible. Amanda brought me coffee and sat beside me briefly. For what it's worth, many of us protested how things were handled. Bradley was adamant that making a public example would set the tone for his leadership. Some tones aren't worth setting, I replied quietly. When Marcus and Bradley finally emerged, the contrast between them was striking. Marcus looked resolute, while Bradley appeared deflated, the arrogance drained from his posture. Let's reconvene, Marcus announced, returning to his seat at the head of the table. Bradley took his place without meeting anyone's eyes. After careful consideration of our situation, Marcus began, I've made several decisions to address our current crisis. First and foremost, we need to immediately restore our security compliance to meet the government contract requirements. Ina, I'd like to formally request your assistance in this matter as a senior consultant with full authority to reinstate the necessary protocols. I nodded my acceptance. It was the professional thing to do, regardless of personal feelings. Secondly, Marcus continued, Ryan Parker will step down as security director effective immediately. His role will be reassigned once our compliance issues are resolved. Ryan, still sitting in the corner, looked relieved rather than offended. He had clearly realized he was out of his depth. Marcus took a deep breath before delivering the final blow. Lastly, in light of recent events, Bradley will be stepping back from operational leadership to focus on strategic projects under my direct supervision. The room was silent, Bradley's demotion coming just 2 weeks after his grand entrance as the company's new leader was unprecedented. He stared at the table, his jaw clenched tightly. Barbara Taylor, the most senior board member, spoke up. I believe these changes are appropriate given the circumstances. The board's primary concern must be the company's stability and contractual obligations. Marcus, we support your decision. With the formal business concluded, Marcus turned to me. Ina, could you outline what needs to happen to restore our compliance before the final audit? For the next hour, I detailed the necessary steps, reinstating the original security protocols, documenting the reasons for the temporary changes, conducting internal audits to verify compliance, and preparing comprehensive explanations for the temporary government auditors. It would require intense work from the entire technical team, but it was achievable. As the meeting concluded, board members filed out, several stopping to welcome me back or express their confidence in the remediation plan. Bradley left without a word while Marcus asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, Marcus sank heavily into his chair. I owe you an enormous apology, Ina. What happened was completely unacceptable. You weren't here, I said simply. That's no excuse. I gave Bradley authority without ensuring he understood our business fundamentals. The public humiliation you endured. I can't imagine how that felt. I appreciated his sincerity, but kept the focus professional. What matters now is restoring the systems before the government audit. Of course, Marcus agreed. But there's also the matter of your position with the company. I would like to offer you a formal role as our new Chief Security Officer, reporting directly to me with expanded authority and a substantial compensation increase. The offer was generous, more than fair given the circumstances. But I needed time to consider whether I wanted to return permanently to a company where I had been so publicly dismissed. I appreciate the offer, Marcus. Let me think about it while we address the immediate crisis. He nodded, understanding. Take whatever time you need. For now, you'll have full authority as a consultant to implement the necessary changes. The entire team has been instructed to give you complete cooperation. The next several days were a whirlwind of activity. I worked directly with the technical teams to reinstate the proper security protocols, document the changes, and prepare for the government audit. The relief among the staff was palpable. They understood the systems I had built, and were glad to return to protocols that made sense. Bradley was notably absent during this period. According to Amanda, he had been assigned to a small office on a different floor, effectively removed from the daily operations of the company. His meteoric rise and fall had become a cautionary tale whispered throughout the organization. A week later, the government auditors returned for their final assessment. With the original security framework restored and properly documented, we passed with flying colors. The lead auditor even commented that our rapid remediation demonstrated the company's commitment to security excellence. The evening after the successful audit, Marcus invited me to dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Seattle waterfront. As we discussed the future of TechVision's security operations, he brought up an unexpected topic. I'm considering how to handle Bradley going forward, he said, swirling his wine thoughtfully. He made terrible mistakes, but he's still my son. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes, I offered neutrally. Would you be opposed to him remaining with the company in some capacity? Not in leadership, of course, but perhaps in an area where he could develop a better understanding of our business from the ground up? The question surprised me. After everything that had happened, Marcus was still asking for my input on his son's future. I believe in second chances, I said finally. But real growth requires acknowledging mistakes and making amends. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He has a lot to learn about leadership and respect for expertise. Perhaps starting in a junior role under proper supervision would provide that education. The conversation shifted to my own future. After careful consideration, I had decided to accept the Chief Security Officer position, but with conditions: direct board reporting authority for compliance matters, a seat on the executive committee, and formal approval rights for any significant changes to security protocols. Marcus readily agreed to my terms. You've more than earned this authority, Ina, and recent events have made it abundantly clear why these safeguards are necessary. As we concluded our dinner, Marcus shared one final reflection. You know, when you simply handed over those keys without argument, it should have been a warning sign to Bradley. Real authority isn't about symbols or titles. It's about knowledge and responsibility. The keys were meaningless without the understanding of what they unlocked. I smiled slightly. Sometimes the most important lessons are learned the hard way. The next morning, a company-wide email announced my appointment as Chief Security Officer. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Colleagues stopped by throughout the day to express their support and share how glad they were to have me back. Late that afternoon, as I was settling into my new office, there was a tentative knock at my door. Bradley stood there looking markedly different from the arrogant figure who had fired me 2 weeks earlier. His expensive suit had been replaced by business casual attire, his perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. "Do you have a minute?" he asked quietly. I gestured for him to enter, curious about what had brought him to my office. "I owe you an apology," he began, clearly uncomfortable, but pushing through it. "My behavior was unprofessional, and my decisions were disastrous for the company. I'm sorry for how I treated you." The apology seemed genuine, if somewhat rehearsed. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "My father has assigned me to the government contracts team as a junior analyst," he continued. "He says I need to understand our business from the foundation up before I can lead effectively." "That sounds like a valuable learning opportunity." Bradley nodded, looking humbled. "The team reports to you ultimately. I want you to know I understand the hierarchy and respect your authority. I'm here to learn, not to challenge." It was a remarkable transformation from the man who had declared himself a big boss while publicly firing me. Whether it would last remained to be seen, but it was a start. "Everyone makes mistakes, Bradley. What matters is what you learn from them." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "The keys. When you just handed them over without arguing, I thought it meant you had nothing left to contribute. I was completely wrong." After he left, I sat reflecting on the whirlwind of events. In just 3 weeks, I had gone from being publicly fired to becoming Chief Security Officer with expanded authority. Bradley had fallen from triumphant new leader to junior analyst, and TechVision had narrowly avoided losing its most important contract. All because of a simple ring of keys symbols that represented something far more complex than Bradley had understood. In handing them over with dignity, rather than resistance, I had set in motion a chain of events that revealed the true nature of authority and expertise. Sometimes I realized the most powerful response to injustice is simply to let consequences unfold naturally. The keys I gave him had indeed destroyed his career, not through any vindictive action on my part, but through his own failure to understand what they truly represented. 6 months passed quickly. Winter gave way to spring in Seattle, bringing cherry blossoms to the city parks and a fresh energy to TechVision. Under my leadership as Chief Security Officer, the government contract was progressing smoothly. Our security protocols were stronger than ever, and company morale had rebounded from the turmoil of Bradley's brief tenure. My new office, with its expansive view of the Seattle skyline, symbolized the expanded scope of my role. Where I had once been responsible primarily for security operations, I now oversaw all aspects of the company's risk management, compliance, and data protection strategies. The crisis had ultimately led to a stronger, more resilient organization. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth, of course. Rebuilding trust takes time, and the public nature of my firing had left lingering effects throughout the company. Some employees still walked on eggshells around leadership, afraid that they too might be publicly humiliated for perceived shortcomings. Addressing this fear became one of my first priorities. With Marcus's full support, I implemented a comprehensive review of company policies regarding terminations, performance management, and conflict resolution. We established clear guidelines that emphasized treating all employees with dignity and respect, regardless of circumstances. Leadership isn't about intimidation or public examples, I explained, during a company-wide meeting to introduce the new policies. It's about creating an environment where everyone can contribute their best work without fear. The changes weren't just about policies on paper. We reorganized teams to foster greater collaboration, instituted regular feedback sessions where employees could voice concerns without repercussion, and created mentorship programs to develop talent at all levels of the organization. Diana, my former assistant, had been promoted to Security Operations Manager, overseeing the day-to-day implementation of our protocols. "You taught me that security isn't just about systems," she told me during her first week in the new role. "It's about people understanding why the systems matter." Amanda from HR became a close ally in transforming the company culture. "What happened to you was a wake-up call," she confided over lunch one day. "It showed us how quickly a toxic leadership style can undermine years of positive culture building." And what of Bradley? True to his word, he had immersed himself in learning the business from the ground up. As a junior analyst on the government contracts team, he studied the compliance frameworks, security protocols, and client requirements that form the foundation of our success. His transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. There were occasions when glimpses of his former arrogance surfaced, particularly when dealing with newer employees who didn't know his history. But these incidents became increasingly rare, as he experienced the reality of building something valuable rather than simply taking credit for others' work. Marcus had taken a more active role in mentoring his son, something he admitted he should have done years earlier. "I thought giving Bradley authority would naturally lead to responsibility," he told me during one of our weekly strategy meetings. "I had it backwards. Responsibility has to come first. Then authority follows naturally when it's earned." 3 months into his role as an analyst, Bradley made his first meaningful contribution to the government contract, identifying a potential efficiency in our documentation process that would save hundreds of hours without compromising security. He brought the idea to me, directly presenting it with data to support his conclusions and an implementation plan that respected our compliance requirements. "This is solid work," I told him honestly. "Let's present it to the team and get their input." The slight smile that crossed his face at this acknowledgement showed how much he had changed. Where once he would have demanded immediate implementation of his idea, as a demonstration of his authority, he now understood the value of collaborative improvement. By the 6-month mark, TechVision had not only recovered from the crisis, but was thriving. The government contract that had been jeopardized by Bradley's actions was now our showcase project, leading to inquiries from other federal agencies interested in our security solutions. My personal healing journey had progressed alongside the company's. The public humiliation of being fired had left deeper wounds than I initially acknowledged. For weeks afterward, I had recurring dreams about standing exposed before judging eyes, waking with the phantom sensation of hundreds of stares on my back as I walked out of that conference room. Working with a therapist helped me process these feelings and recognize that maintaining my dignity in the face of injustice had been an act of strength, not weakness. "You didn't let someone else's poor behavior determine your response," she observed. "That's a powerful form of self-respect." This perspective helped me approach my new role with confidence, rather than lingering resentment. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me, but by how I had responded to it and what I had built afterward. On a rainy Tuesday in April, Marcus invited me to join him for coffee in the small garden atrium on the top floor of our building. As we watched raindrops pattern the glass ceiling, he shared news that would mark another turning point for the company. "I'm considering retirement," he said, his expression thoughtful. "Not immediately, but within the next year or two." "TechVision is your legacy," I replied. "Are you sure you're ready to step away?" "A legacy isn't just what you build," he said. "It's also how well it continues without you." The crisis with Bradley showed me that I hadn't prepared the company for succession properly. I want to do better this time. "What does that mean for leadership going forward?" I asked. though I suspected where the conversation was heading. I'm creating a succession committee with the board's approval. You'll be part of it, of course. We'll be evaluating internal candidates for executive roles, providing development opportunities, and creating a transition plan that ensures continuity. And Bradley, I couldn't help asking. Marcus smiled wryly. He's on a much longer development track now. The experience has been humbling but necessary. In time, he may earn a leadership role if he continues to demonstrate growth. But it won't be handed to him based on his last name. As our conversation concluded, Marcus added one final thought. You know, Ina, when you handed over those keys so calmly, you demonstrated something I've always believed. True authority doesn't come from a title or position. It comes from knowledge, integrity, and earning the respect of those around you. I carried that observation with me as I returned to my office, reflecting on how dramatically my professional journey had changed course in just 6 months. The public firing that had seemed like an ending had actually been the beginning of something far more meaningful, a renewed organization built on authentic leadership and mutual respect. The keys I had slid across the table that day hadn't just been physical objects. They had represented a choice about how to respond to injustice with dignity, rather than drama with professionalism, rather than petty revenge. That choice had ultimately led to positive change not just for me but for everyone at TechVision. As I looked out over the Seattle skyline from my office window, watching ferries cross the Sound against the backdrop of distant mountains, I felt a sense of peace that had been hard-won through difficult experience. Sometimes life's most valuable lessons come disguised as our most painful moments. The keys that Bradley thought would symbolize his authority had instead revealed its absence. True leadership, I had learned, isn't about declaring yourself a big boss. It's about earning trust through competence, building others up rather than tearing them down, and responding to challenges with integrity rather than ego. That's the message I hope resonates with you. Have you ever faced unfair treatment in your workplace? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if my journey has provided any inspiration or insight for your own professional challenges, please hit that like button and subscribe for more reflections on navigating the complex world of work with dignity and purpose. Thank you for joining me on this journey of growth and healing, and remember that sometimes our greatest strength comes from how we respond when others underestimate our value.